kick off the welcome and keynote presentation by first giving you a brief overview of our group, and then passing the word over to our keynote speaker, Andrea Thierez from the Belgian regulator. So very quickly, I'm going to cover some expertise that are take this opportunity to cover some expertise that our team at the Center for Operations Research and Econometrics brings in energy. So the CORE is a research division within the Université Catholique de Louvain, and it's actually a very interesting melting pot for a variety of disciplines founded in the decades ago. It brings together many experts in econometrics, statistics, economic theory, optimization. And what is interesting, I think, within CORE is the culture that has developed in electricity markets and power system optimization. So we boast a great tradition in optimization theory. So two of our great names in this area are Yuri Nesterov and Lawrence Wolsey. Yuri Nesterov has made important contributions to convex optimization, complexity analysis of various optimization methods, semi-definite programming, interior point methods, and so on, with a number of very important academic distinctions. Lawrence Wolsey is one of the fathers of integer and combinatorial optimization, who also carries an impressive set of academic distinctions. The energy space, notable activities, and here I should mention I'm forgetting a very large number of important colleagues, but some of the notable activities that also attest to the applied nature of the work of CORE are the spin-off of NSIDE, which is a optimization consultancy that made a landmark with the development of the Euphemia algorithm for clearing the European day-ahead electricity market, and moved on from there to do very interesting activities in the energy space, and also the collaboration that and then the company was co-founded by Philippe Chevalier, who was a former director of our group, and also in the applied space, Yves Smears has made important contributions and established a very strong link between CORE and ENGIE. A lot of his students went on to go up the ranks of the company, and the company has really supported our work as an energy team and brought us closer to the real world and posing interesting questions and technically challenging questions. In terms of the activity of our group, I've always found this puzzle here helpful to indicate what are the methodologies that we use and the applications that we're interested in. So in the blue pieces of the puzzle, you see the problems that we're interested in, and in the yellow pieces, the methods that we employ. So the large-scale question that we're always trying to answer is, how can we use as much renewable energy as possible while not compromising the quality of service of consumers and exploiting the flexibility that is out there in power systems? And how can we design institutions, markets that can support this transition of our energy systems towards sustainability? And towards this end, we naturally tackle problems of power system scheduling, so mixed integer linear programming or mixed integer linear optimization, how to cope with uncertainty, so the extension of this problem to stochastic programming, and large realistic systems, so exploiting parallel computing to have a competitive advantage in our analysis and be able to do serious analytics on real problems. You see also in this figure some of the important institutions that have actively supported our work. So many thanks go to the Frankie Foundation, which provided very important funding in 2018 to allow our team to focus on research, which brought a happy outcome of a European Research Council starting grant in 2019, support from the European Commission on Horizon 2020 collaborative projects. And as I mentioned earlier, ENGIE has always been there for us from day one through the NG chair, providing startup funding, but also direct interactions with experts within the company to develop an interesting research agenda, which is also technically rich. Then regarding the positioning of our team, we try to exploit the in-house expertise of core in optimization and power system economics, but also combine it with a network of experts within Europe and internationally on electricity market design, and also a network of our own team that has gone on to, for example, US federal research labs and allows us to have access to parallel computing infrastructure that allows us to bring heavy-duty computation to realistic data sets to do interesting analytics. So our team tries to sit at this intersection of this very interesting interdisciplinary frontier. Today we are here to celebrate the graduation of 3 great students that I've had the pleasure to work with, Gilles Bertrand, Ilyes Mescani, and Yuting Mu, who have worked respectively on Gilles has worked on intraday trading and balancing markets. Ilyes has worked on transmission distribution coordination, and Yuting has worked on demand response. And currently in the group there are 7 active PhDs. So Daniel Avila, Jacques Carteufels, Jehun Cho, Céline Gerard, Loic van Herbeek, co-supervised with Professor Pierre-Antoine Absil, Quentin Lette, and Nicolas Stevens. And I should also mention that Yuting Mu was co-supervised by Professor Philippe Chevalier and myself. And when the COVID did not block us from doing this, we get together every Christmas and have a Christmas dinner. So I think this is the Christmas dinner of last year, but these times are soon to come. But for this year, we're going to have a virtual event. I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes to talk to you briefly about what each of the students is working on. The work of Gilles, Yuting, and Ilyes, you'll have a chance to see in more detail later in the two-day events, but very quickly, Gilles is working on developing reinforcement learning algorithms for optimizing trading in continuous intraday markets. Gilles is working on developing platforms for market clearing in the context of transmission distribution coordination. And then a few more detailed maybe words about the work of other team members, since they won't have a chance to present in this session, starting in the list I referred to earlier. So Daniel is working on parallelizing the stochastic dual dynamic programming algorithm, which is an industry standard for multi-stage planning under uncertainty. So we're trying to exploit parallel computing to accelerate commercial software like the PSR SDDP software package. Jacques is working on developing a detailed model of the Belgian electric power system that serves towards calibrating demand curves for balancing capacity, or so-called operating reserve demand curves for scarcity pricing. And this is a collaboration with the Belgian regulator and interactions with the Belgian transmission system operator. Jehun Cho was inspired from work that came out of the teams of Ross Baldick, Bill Hogan, and ISO New England on pricing consistently in a multi-period environment with uncertainty. So he's extending the analysis of those groups to accommodate for the uncertainty of real-time platforms, which we anticipate to be an important element moving forward. Céline Gerard picked up the agenda of Yuting Mu on demand response by focusing on developing aggregator business models for residential demand response, service offerings that are simple for households to understand, and how you price these service offerings in a way that consumers reveal their flexibility, but also enroll to services in a way that you can actually serve them. So accounting for the fact that you have a limited fleet, and some of the fleet, like wind power, is unreliable. So differentiating the offering of the service to that limitation. And Quentin Lette finally is working on congestion management. So our team has spent years on attempting to develop detailed models of the European electricity market clearing. So two-stage models of day-ahead operations followed by real-time, and we're able to answer interesting questions about, for example, how flow-based market coupling design interacts with efficient scheduling of units in the day ahead. What does transmission switching do for you in this environment? What are the long-term investment signals implied by different market designs, and so on. I'm going to leave the last couple of minutes before passing over to Andreas to talk a bit about the logistics of the event. So you are now in the keynote session, where the heart of the session starts in 5 minutes with Andrea Tires, who's from the Belgian Regulatory Commission for Electricity and Gas, who will talk about various pricing challenges in European electricity markets. And then it's followed by the first technical session with 4 talks at 2 p.m. today. So all of these times are Central European times or Brussels time. So we have Johan Marek and Wolfgang Woods from Insight, who will talk about applying reinforcement learning to topology optimization. I should mention this session is on the application of machine learning methods to power system operations, and it's chaired by Gilles Bertrand. Then I'm going to briefly talk about using Markov decision processes to model market design options for European balancing markets. Olivier Martin from ENGIE, who will talk about algorithmic trading in intraday markets, and Gilles Bertrand, who will also talk about a similar topic, but using reinforcement learning to optimize trading in intraday markets. Then tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. Brussels time, we have the second session of the event that will be on demand response, and it will be moderated by Yuting Mu. So here we have as a first speaker Dimitris Papadaskalopoulos from Imperial College and NTUA, who will talk about combining game theory and learning to do interesting analysis of electricity markets. Leonardo Mez from the Vlerick School of Business and the Florence School of Regulation, who will talk about his very interesting work on distribution, so electricity markets with distribution network constraints. Dimitri Tomanos from ENGIE Impact, who will talk about a production sizing optimization tool that's developed within the company, and Yuting Mu, who will talk about modeling of priority service pricing and multi-level demand subscription as appropriate business models for implementing residential demand response. And the last session of the event will be moderated by Ilyes Mesgani tomorrow at 2 p.m. Brussels time, and it will be focused on flexibility markets and optimal power flow. So first speaker will be Ibrahim Abada from ENGIE Impact, who will talk about the snowball effect of energy communities. Ilyes will talk about his work on developing a platform for integrated transmission distribution coordination. Burak Koçuk from Sabancı University, who will talk about multi-period optimal power flow. And finally, one of our own, Ignacio Aravena, who's now at Lawrence Livermore National Labs, and he will talk about how he was able to challenge one of the very prestigious US Department of Energy grid optimization challenge, which was concluded last year, and it saw Ignacio's team place first among a very competitive set of top US universities. Finally, a quick remark on the organization of the session. So first of all, you should be aware that these sessions are recorded. Speakers can indicate to us at the beginning of their talk if they want to take questions only in the end, or if they want to make pit stops throughout their talk. And our moderator will be collecting questions from you, which you can insert through the chat function of Microsoft Teams. And in the end of the session, you can reserve a bit of time for live Q&A, where you can use the raise hand function so that the moderator gives you the word. And then once you have the word, you can turn your camera on if you wish, and unmute your mic. And that way we can have an interactive chat despite the difficult circumstances. With that, I will pass the word over to Andreas Tires, and I want to thank all the attendants and the speakers, and look forward to a very nice today event. Andreas, the floor is yours. You can try and share your presentation.
Thank you, Anton. Okay, I hope my presentation is visible.
Yes.
I hear an echo, but okay. So yes, thank you, Anthony. I'm very pleased for receiving the invitation to give this keynote presentation, especially because it's coming from university, from UCL. We are working together on scarcity pricing. So Anthony and his team has done already some studies on this subject. And more generally, I think it's very important for regulators to have good contacts with, and that we can collaborate on topics for the energy markets, because there are some complex issues in the energy markets, and more specifically for power markets. And so we need the smart people from the academic world to think hard on these problems. And so I'm also pleased to say that one of the PhD graduates, Gilles Bertrand, has accepted the offer of the CREG to come and work for us. So I think this highlights the importance that we give to what is happening in the academic world. In my presentation, I will talk about price signals, and on a few occasions I will come back to what you could view as the basics of economics and the role of prices in liberalized power markets. There are two main themes in my presentation. The first is on adequacy. My conclusion in short will be on this topic that Europe has solved the adequacy issue by two simple rules, and I will come back to that later on. And then the second theme is that of price signals. So even if the adequacy issue has been solved, you still need efficiency. You can focus on your efficiency, and you need more efficient price signals. And I will give some topics that the CREG is working on to make price signals more efficient. So first on adequacy, I will start with a short story about the adequacy crisis we faced in Belgium at the end of 2018. So by the end of September 2018, there was an announcement that we unexpectedly lost 2 to 4 gigawatts of nuclear capacity due to safety issues. And if you compare that with the Belgian maximum peak load, which is under 13 gigawatts, you can assume that there was a shock about these announcements. And then our TSO was expecting or simulating an average of 500 Lowley hours, so 500 hours on average were expected with curtailments, and a shortage of 1.6 to 1.7 gigawatts of capacity. There was a clear market reaction. Here you can see forward prices for the year ahead, quarter ahead, and the month ahead delivery for the winter 2018-2019. And for November, which saw the highest spikes, even prices up to 200 euros per megawatt hour for a baseload delivery in November 2018. So there was a clear market reaction to these adequacy risks. And then this price signal of scarcity also made market actors to respond to these prices. In total, the Belgian market added more than 1,000 megawatts of additional capacities within a short notice, 1 to 3 months' time. These capacities were old capacities that were put back online. It were rented emergency generators. It was demand response, a lot of demand response, 500 megawatts, and some slow reserves, which we could not verify, but it was announced to be about 200 megawatts. So in total, more than 1 gigawatt added in a very short notice. So we can say that, yes, of course, markets responded to these price signals. And ex post, we saw that there was no adequacy problem whatsoever. So on the day-ahead market, for example, the highest hourly price we saw was 500 euros per megawatt hour. And we made a study, an ex post study, where the CREG calculated that there was at all times during the winter a margin left of at least 3.6 gigawatt before curtailment. So if you compare the 3.6 gigawatt with the margin before curtailment, and if you compare that with the 1.6, 1.7 gigawatt of shortage of gap that the TSO had calculated or simulated, you can see that this 5 gigawatt gap is huge compared to peak load of 13 gigawatt. So there was a clear overestimation of the adequacy risk by the TSO and or an underestimation of the market reaction. And then you can ask the question, how is it possible that the adequacy problems were so overestimated? A first explanation is that a TSO is risk averse. He wants to avoid curtailments at any cost because costs are, to avoid this, are passed to consumers. So yes, we know that TSOs generally are risk averse, but there is also a second explanation, and this is a basic feature of a market failure, is information asymmetry. Dus having correct and complete information on all actors relevant to energy, or in this case electricity, is just impossible. So this very quick and strong reaction from market parties that we saw in Belgium was unexpected by the TSO, the ministry, but also by us, by the CREG. And for sure you can come up with numerous other examples regarding market reactions that were not anticipated, because it's about distributed generation information, and this information is not directly available to regulators and to TSOs. And it was this feature of this market failure of information asymmetry that was an important reason to liberalize markets and to avoid central planning by bureaucratic institutions like and the ministry. In my view, the regulation from last year, the European regulation 943 from last year, and especially Chapter 4 on resource adequacy and Article 10 is a further step in this liberalization process. And I will certainly come back to this Article 10, which for me is a very important article in this regulation. So, to sum up the importance of price signals, and this is certainly the basics of economics. Prices, they aggregate the distributed information on the state of the system. They signal to the market actors what the state of the system is, and then all these distributed market actors can act on this price signal, changing the state of the system. So these efficient price signals are essential for the good functioning to the market. Just repeating some basics, I think. Okay, then second part of the theme on adequacy is the removal of price caps and its impact on adequacy assessments. So like I said, this Article 10 is, in my view, very important, and it just says that there cannot be a maximum limit to the wholesale electricity price. There can be a technical bidding limit, which is currently on the day ahead 3,000 euros per megawatt hour, but this bidding limit needs to increase by 1,000 euros per megawatt hour every time the market price reaches at least 60% of the bidding limit in a market in the EU, in the connected EU power markets. So when there is scarcity or near scarcity, the bidding limit will increase by 1,000 euros per megawatt hour. And you can even say that when you still expect some curtailment, when the LOLE is not zero in a control area in the EU, the bidding limit is expected to increase. So this is important. If you combine this with what the reliability standard, if you combine this with the definition of the reliability standards, as decided by ACER and the NRAs, then you come to a LOLE target, which is defined the cost of new entry, so the KONE simplified divided by the VOL, the value of lost load. You can also take into account the KONE, but a simplified definition is LOLE is equal to Kone divided by vol. This is your reliability standard. If your LOLE is higher than this number, this LOLE target, then your system is not adequate. There are problems with adequacy. If your LOLE, your expected curtailment hours, is lower than this target, adequacy is okay. You can say that if you then do your adequacy assessment, so there are also rules about a European resource adequacy assessment, the ERA, and in this adequacy assessment or other adequacy assessments, if the yearly expected revenue of a capacity is higher than its cost, the cost of new entry, then the capacity will come to the market. During LOLE hours with curtailment, we know that the market price needs to go to the bidding limit, and then you have your yearly expected revenue during these scarcity hours calculated as the LOLE multiplied by the bidding limit multiplied by the capacity. So then you can say that if your bidding limit is higher than your vol, then you can conclude that the yearly expected revenue only during these scarcity hours is already higher than the cost of new entry. Because from the previous definition, we know that the cost of new entry is defined as the vol multiplied by the LOLE. So the revenue during scarcity hours is already sufficient for new capacity to come to the market, so you cannot conclude in your assessment, you cannot conclude to an adequacy concern if your bidding limit is higher than the value of lost load. One could argue that the bidding limit that is higher than the vol could be politically unstable, but I think this is probably not the case because these bidding limits are not regulated by politicians, but by ACER. ACER has decided on this bidding limit increase rule. It's a European agency and then 27 NRAs. And this was confirmed by the regulation 943, which was introduced by the member states, by the politicians. And in addition, your value of lost load does not need to be that high. It's the vol that reflects the willingness to pay to avoid a forced load shedding during an emergency plan. And this needs to be cost efficient, so your vol needs to be as low as possible. And for Belgium, for example, it's mostly consumers that are in the emergency plan and that are subject to curtailment when there are adequacy problems. Households in rural areas with a vol of 2,000, 5,000 can even be higher, but it's already lower than the current price cap for real-time prices in Belgium, which is set at 13,500 euros already. So I think the bidding limit is already higher than the vol, so this condition is already being met. So you can conclude that in any adequacy assessment, which is implementing the rules, the European rules correctly, the automatic adjustment of the bidding limit will make the limit as high as needed to ensure market entry. And if the cost of new capacity would increase due to whatever reason, can be higher price risk or increased costs, it also relaxes the reliability standard through a higher LOLE target, because we know LOLE is defined as Kone divided by vol. So if your Kone is increasing, also your LOLE target is more relaxed. So the conclusion of this part on adequacy is that two simple rules, Article 10, no price caps, and the definition decided by ACER of the LOLE target make that in an assessment, in an adequacy assessment, you cannot come to the conclusion that there is an adequacy concern. And if you don't have an adequacy concern, you cannot introduce a capacity mechanism according to the regulation. So making price signals is not anymore about solving adequacy issues, because this has already been solved, but about increasing the system efficiency. For example, by lowering the risk premium, because if you can lower the risk premium, this will lead to a lower cost of new entry, cost of new capacity, and then your low load target will decrease, so you will have fewer hours of curtailment, which is of course beneficial to society. So this concludes my first part on adequacy. I will now talk about some topics that are the focus of the CREG, about making price signals more efficient. So 3 topics. The first is on forward markets and its role in risk aversion. So if we talk about risk and risk aversion, there is a well-known simple experiment where you can offer people the following choice. So either you receive a guaranteed 450 euros, or you can choose to flip a coin, and when it's head, you win 1100 euros, and when it's tails, you lose 100 euros. So you have to pay 100 euros. And then the choice is offered. Are you going to choose for the flip coin game or just the guaranteed 450 euros? And most people would take the 450 euros, even though the expected profit of the coin flip game is higher, it's 500 euros. We know that people don't like uncertainty and that they prefer this certainty. Of course, if there would exist an option where you can earn the expected value, in this case 500 euros, without running the risk of the coin flip, people would of course prefer this option. And this is exactly what forward markets provide. On forward markets, you can trade against the expected value. And in power markets, this is important because profits depend on these unexpected events. And I give a small example or a simple example with a producer that has a CCGT. And in the next quarter, he has to decide today what he will do. And in the next quarter, he thinks there can be 2 possible scenarios. The first one, with a probability of 50%, is that in the first quarter of next year, there will be a cold spell and low wind output, which will result in very high power prices and also a high profit for the producer, say 5 million euros, a handsome profit for this CCGT. He also thinks that there can be another scenario, also with a probability of 50%, where he makes a small loss or a loss of 1 million because we have normal temperatures and a lot of wind output, which depresses the prices. And so because there are some fixed costs to pay, he makes a loss of 1 million. So in this case, the expected profit is half of the 5 million profit and half of the 1 million loss, so that this results in a 2 million expected profit. So the forward price is equal to the expected value of the spot price with the risk premium, which we ignore in this case. And so the producer can then sell its electricity, its CCGT, on the forward market against the expected spot price and earn a certain profit, in this case, in the example, 2 million, without running the risk of the coin flip. So, and this is important. Forward markets take away the risk of uncertain events because you can trade against the expected value without running the risk of the coin flip. However, there are 2 types of variables, 2 types of uncertainties. First type is the variables that I already mentioned, like temperature and wind output, also outages on your own unit, but also on other units. And if you take the point of view of an investor, and he needs to make an investment now, then these kind of variables will be unknown to the investor today, but also during the lifetime of the assets. So these variables, they are now unknown, but they stay unknown also when the investor will hedge its output on the forward market. For example, now in 2020, you don't know whether a cold spell will occur in 2030, but also in 2029, 1 year ahead, when you will hedge your output on the forward market, also in 2029, it will be unknown whether a cold spell will occur in 2030. So these variables, because you can hedge them, do not lead to an increased price risk, and we call them, for simplicity, class B variables. But there are other variables like fuel and CO2 prices, which are unknown now when the investor needs to take an investment decision, but they become known when the investor will hedge its output on the forward markets. For example, the CO2 price in 2030 is unknown now in 2020, but the moment in 2029 when you will hedge your output on the forward market, in 2029 you will have already a price on the forward market of the CO2. And so these variables can increase the price risk, and these are class A variables. And the distinction between these two classes is important. Climate conditions and unexpected outages can have a dramatic impact on prices, but you can hedge them. So there is no significant increase of risk. On the contrary, fuel prices also have a smaller, also have an impact, maybe a smaller impact on prices, but investors cannot hedge them, at least not over the total lifetime of the assets. So there is an increase of the risk. So forward markets are important. They can take out a large part of the risk, but not all. And to illustrate this, I just a simple calculation or a simple example of the CCGT and the investor that is trying to estimate his profit in 2030, in 10 years' time. And he's simulating 6 scenarios with class B variables, dependent on the temperature, wind, and outages on other units, and also 6 scenarios of class A variables, depending on low or high gas prices, CO2, and coal prices. And so these 2 times 6 variables, they lead to 36 expected profits, 36 outcomes, ranging from 100 to -50. 100 when all variables are positive for the profit of CCGTs, for example, low temperature, low wind, and many outages on other power plants, and also low gas, low CO2, and very high coal prices. So then you end up in the upper left cell with a profit of 100, and on the contrary, when it's the inverse, like high temperature and high wind and high gas prices and high CO2 prices, you are making a loss of -50. So you have 36 outcomes, and from those 36 outcomes, we see that 3 are 0 profit and 9 are even a loss. So in 25% of cases, 9 out of 36, the investor is simulating a loss. But we know that in 2029, the investor will be able to hedge its output on the forward market, which means that he can trade against the expected value over the class B variables. So that means that these 6 outcomes, the expected value of this will be 50. And the use of forward markets, so if you include forward markets, these 36 outcomes, they will be translated in only 6 outcomes, ranging from 0 to 50. And both outcomes have the same expected profit. It's 25 in this example. So you have here 36 outcomes resulting in 25 as an expected profit, and here 6 outcomes also resulting in the same expected profit. So the expected profit is the same, but the risk profile is quite different. If you don't take into account forward markets, then in 25% of scenarios, you will suffer a loss. And with forward markets, you can avoid that in this simple example. And then I think it's important to know that the TSOs, also ENTSO-E, has until now only simulated prices without taking into account forward markets. And then, as I showed with this simple example, the resulting profits would imply higher risks than in reality. So without taking forward markets into account, you could incorrectly conclude that a higher risk compensation is needed, which will result in a higher WACC and thus also in a higher cost of new entry than is the case in reality. So a good estimation of the risk compensation should be based on the true distribution of revenues for a certain assets, and this needs that you take forward markets into account. And for that, the CREG proposed the following. So if you do an adequacy assessment, then I think it's important that you take into account the distinction between these class A and class B variables, so that you take, for example, 15 realistic combinations of CO2 and fuel prices, and you take 20 historical climate years and outage patterns. So the combination of these two will result in 300 market revenues, but then you need to include the forward markets, which means that you will average, or that you will take the expected value over the class B variables. And this will result not in 300 market revenues, but only in 15 market revenues. And then if you want to have a distribution of market revenues, you can take random draws, and it's based on this distribution of market revenues that you can calculate a measure for risk aversion. If forward markets are important to lower the risk, then of course market completeness is important, so that we need more forward products that can be easily traded. We have already forward markets for baseload and a kind of definition of peakload, but forward markets for super peak capacities are underdeveloped, and super peak capacities like demand response and emergency generators. In Germany, there is already some options that can be traded. So there is some super peak capacity market already in place, but in most countries in Europe, this is not the case. So if we could develop these markets, this will decrease the risk regarding investments in super peak capacities. A side remark is that I think forward markets for baseload and peak load capacities are much more important than forward markets for super peak capacities, because as we have seen, for example, in the example that I gave on the adequacy crisis in Belgium at the end of 2018, we know that super peak capacities have a lower, sometimes a much lower lead time. What we saw in Belgium was lead times of even 1 month, and also generally have a lower capex. You can even rent emergency generators if you think there is a risk for an adequacy crisis. So the capex is lower lead times. So the importance of these forward markets is not as it has not the same importance as good baseload and peak load forward markets. So this was about forward markets. I will also talk about scarcity pricing. It's a subject, as I mentioned, where UCL and Anthony and his team has done already several studies on it. We think it's an important element to come to more efficient price signals, and so the CREG has committed itself to introduce scarcity pricing in Belgium. Also, this is also supported by the regulation. The European regulation is also by the Commission. There was a favorable opinion by DG Enner on scarcity pricing, and even with a request to consider it to implement it by the 1st of January 2022 in Belgium. And we will try our best to meet this deadline. Scarcity pricing, we know that the power system needs energy and reserves, not only energy, but also reserves, because without reserves, you cannot ensure the reliability of the system, and so you cannot deliver your energy. Now, the market design is such that reserves are procured by the TSO in a separate market. while paying a capacity fee for standing by. And if you want prices to efficiently reflect the true system need for capacity and the risk of curtailment, then the price needs to adequately reflect the need for not only energy but also reserves. And this is what scarcity pricing does. I think this is a well-known figure about scarcity pricing. So you just shift your demand curve to the right. You rotate it a bit. So when there is no scarcity, then this increased demand will not increase prices much, or even will not increase prices. If there is scarcity, and even in near scarcity, which is important, then the price adder, the price that is added to the energy price can become significant. So the principle, so scarcity pricing can come in many forms. So at CREG we decided to go for the ORDC, the operating reserve demand curve, which I explained in the previous slide. It's also already in place in Texas. So the principle is that if the volume of fast reserves is equal to a minimum level, and that then any load increase would lead to curtailment, then the value of reserves should be equal to the value of lost load, to the value of this curtailment. And for any amount of reserves above that minimum level, the value of reserves should be equal to the probability of curtailment, multiplied by the vol. So it's not only about scarcity, but also about near scarcity. And then you need an estimation of the vol, which is not that easy to come with a good estimation of the vol. You need a determination of the loss of load probability function, of the expected volume of reserves that can be activated in this time period, in this short time period. So you can then calculate a price adder, which is proportional or even equal to the vol multiplied with the loss of load probability. And then an important scarcity pricing, you will be able to replace a few very high price spikes by more frequent spikes of lower magnitude through this price adder. This is a figure that we had from Anthony and Jacques, who are working on the scarcity pricing for the CREG. And then on your left, you see that there are frequent spikes, higher prices due to this price adder, but the spikes are much lower than what you can see in the right. So this will also decrease the risk for an investor. An investor doesn't like that all of his revenues should come from just one spike. It's too risky. He will prefer more spikes, even if they are lower, but more frequent. So this translation of the distribution of the spikes is important and will lead to lower risk compensation that is needed for this kind of capacities. So some properties, it's scarcity pricing, in this case the ORDC, provides an all-inclusive remuneration. It is technology neutral because it's just a price, and whatever technology, whatever capacity that can deliver it can receive this price, so it's technology neutral. It will facilitate the energy transition, because then we will have a lot of, with a lot of wind and solar, we will have a lot of capacities with zero or very low marginal costs. But with the price adder, you can avoid this to a certain extent. It will pay for flexibility. So the units that are able to react very quickly, they will receive this price adder, also just for standing by. With the price adder, even if it's not necessary, as I explained in the first part, but with the price adder, it will increase. It could increase the energy, the price that is being paid, if there is some scarcity that is expected. So it will also help to solve at least a part of the missing money problem. And then depending on the design, ORDC will make investing in peak capacity less risky, as I explained in the previous slides. So final studies for the CREG are being done by UCL on this topic. And then a third topic of making price signals more efficient is on the best forecast of redispatching. So the CREG published a study on this topic last year, and we are advocating for this because we think this is important and it will become more important in the future. Just some again some basics in power system. You need generation and demand, but also transmission capacity. So the location of your generation and your demand is important, and to be able to deliver energy, there needs to be a transmission capacity. Prices should reflect the true situation of the system, so it should reflect the actual available generation and transmission capacity. And when congestion occurs, so when transmission capacity is insufficient, then you need redispatching to maintain the system. And this redispatching always distorts the price signal. When it doesn't happen frequently, okay, we should not care about it. It's not important because it's infrequent. But when it occurs, when congestion occurs frequently, and also the subsequent redispatching, then it will distort prices a lot. But luckily, if it happens frequently, you can also predict pretty accurately which units will be redispatched. And if you can use this best forecast, then it's possible to do preventive redispatch. So if you already know that some units, even though they are available to produce, but there will be a lack of transmission capacity, so they will not be able to inject in the system, so they're not able to offer their electricity to the markets. If you know that in advance, for example, in day ahead, then you can say to these units, okay, we know that you will be redispatched down anyway, so you will not be able to provide energy in real time, so you cannot bid in the day ahead or intraday markets. Maybe you can still receive a compensation because you are blocked for injecting energy, but at least you cannot take part in the price formation for day ahead or intraday, because we know you will not be there, you will not be available. So this preventive redispatch based on the best forecast is a solution to avoid that redispatching distorts the price signal. Of course, this is a second best solution. The first best solution is to have adequate locational price signals. So that means either smaller zones or directly go to nodal pricing. But okay, we are in this situation that we have large zones with a lot of redispatching, and then a second best solution is using the best forecast to execute the preventive redispatch. We think it's very important to avoid price distortion and to come up with more efficient prices. Is this relevant? Yes. When there is a lot of redispatching, then it becomes very important. And you can see this figure is on November 2018. It's based on publicly available data on redispatching in Germany. And then you see that a lot of redispatching, it occurs very frequent, and it can go up to 6,000 megawatts in that month of November of downwards redispatching. So these energy on units were planning to inject in the system. So they were in the money, that took part in the price formation on the day ahead and or intraday market because they were scheduled to run. but they cannot inject it because transmission capacity is insufficient. And so there are other capacities that need to be started, which were not in the money. So they did not, these more expensive capacities were not in the money, were not planned to run, and so they did not take part in the price formation. So these orange, they did take part in the price formation, but they are not available. And on the contrary, this blue energy did not take part. But they were not. They did not take part. Sorry, they did not take part in the price formation, but they were producing in real time. Of course, this is not the correct price. So if you could apply a preventive redispatch, you will shift the supply curve to the left, and then a new price will be formed, and it will be a higher price. And we calculated this for 5 months, from October 2018 until February 2019, on the assumption that import-export would be kept constant, and this would result in a price increase of, on average, 6.2 euros per megawatt hour, and when you only consider hours with redispatching, even 7.8 euros per megawatt hour. So this clearly shows the importance of the price distortion that you have with redispatching when it occurs very frequent, as is the case in Germany. So these were my 3 topics. As a conclusion or a summary, I can say that for adequacy, 2 simple rules, the removal of price caps and the definition of the reliability standard, has solved the adequacy problem, or at least the assessment of adequacy should then be considered as solved. You cannot conclude, if you implement these rules, you cannot conclude that there is an adequacy concern in the future in your assessment. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't focus on better price signals. Yes, it's needed for more efficiency. More forward products and more efficient forward markets will decrease the risk premium, and so the cost of new capacity and also of existing capacity, and thus will lower curtailment. We think that risk aversion should be simulated correctly, with the distinction between uncertainties, variables that are hedgeable and variables that are not, which are unhedgeable. Scarcity pricing efficiently reflects the true system need for capacity. It's not only energy that you need, but also reserves. And so your price should reflect the need of the combined capacity for energy and reserves. And then finally, transmission capacity, so the location where you produce and where you consume, is essential in power markets. And if your best forecast concludes that there is no transmission capacity for a certain unit, then this unit will not be able to supply its energy to the market, and so it cannot take part in the price formation. If it does, then it's distorting the price and not reflecting the true situation of the system. Well, this was my presentation. I'm glad to answer some questions, if any.
Thank you very much, Andreas. There is a bit of an echo. It's okay, I will go. I've taken down about 15 questions that I could pose to initiate the discussion, but maybe I'll pause for a moment to see if any of the attendants would like to raise their hand and raise some questions. Otherwise, I can bring up a couple that can initiate a discussion. I see. I do see one question by Jehun. So maybe Jehun, you want to take the open your mic.
Maybe I can just answer the question.
Sure, if you can read it also. So what happens when the forecast of the distribution of variable B, a variable type B is incorrect? So even if the expectation in the forward market is not accurate.
Yes, for a capacity owner selling its capacity, he doesn't care. He will just sell its capacity to this forward price at this forward price, and it's even difficult to say that forward prices were correct, because it's always on simulations of a lot of scenarios, or that's the principle that the forward price is the expected spot price, and this expected spot price is then the probability weighted average of all scenarios. So I think this is of less importance. I think that the price that is coming out of the forward market, that then is viewed as the correct price by the market, and is the expected spot price. There can be a risk premium, but risk aversion is from both sides. It's from producers, but also from consumers or suppliers. So it will more or less cancel out, maybe not completely, but more or less. And I don't think that eventually what happens then in real time is important for the capacity owner.
Andreas, if I can interject just to extend on that question, and then I'll hand it over to Tim. So obviously, as an agent, you're either going to be overexposing yourself or the contrary. But assuming that there is a central organization that makes adequacy assessments, it raises a debate of what they should assume. So if I understood correctly, you were maybe proposing this methodology as a way for either NSOE or Acer to conduct adequacy analyses. And that raises an interesting question: what the factors should be, how many scenarios, what should be their probabilities, and everyone kind of needs to agree on that. So do you see is that of practical relevance to this discussion?
I think this is, in general, this is a problem because a central authority, a very central authority will simulate the situation for the next 10 years. And then the decision on which scenarios you will use and which assumption you will use is always very important. We saw that also in Belgium. The assumptions that you put in the model are a big driver for the results. And this is regardless whether you will take into account forward markets or not. What we are saying here is that you should also, even if we know that you will never stimulate the correct situation, that's almost certain, but it should reflect reality as much as possible. And then we know that there is one element missing in the current simulations, and that is the use of the existence of forward markets. And so you will improve your simulations. Will it mean that you will simulate the reality? Of course, that is difficult, but you will improve your assessment, and that is rather certain.
Yeah. So a step in the right direction. Great, and I see Jerome has been satisfied by the response. So maybe I'll pass it over to Tim. Tim, I won't attempt to pronounce your last name, but please identify yourself.
You don't have to. Tim Sietek at the Florence School of Regulation. Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. Also, I have many questions, but I will try to keep it short to two of them. One is this issue about preventive redispatch. So I fully agree that the situation what we're having today is a big issue. You showed how in Germany actually the price signal is fully polluted by this. But how much is then preventive redispatch as you describe it, like excluding certain units from actually participating in the day-ahead market? How much is that in line with the CACM guideline? Is that something you can really push through some easy, or is it really a fundamental issue of having the right to access the market? And then I wonder how much is that in line with the ALIA proposal, where they talk about the redispatch hubs, which is somehow, I think, related, but not exactly the same. And then my second question is about forward markets. So one of the issues often cited by people in industry and also academia is that we don't really have well-functioning long-term forward markets, just because they are not very long. And also, as you say, there are maybe some products missing. I wonder, like, what is the role of the regulator in this? Is there really an issue of missing market, or some kind of something that is missing? Or is it just that this signals that there's no need for this, and we might be just wrong, that we don't need this very long-term markets, because these players, they know what they're doing. So I wonder what your view upon that is. Thank you.
Yes. So regarding your first question, is it allowed in CACM? So in my presentation, Tim, I also highlighted that even though you will prevent a unit which will be redispatched downwards anyhow, that you will prevent it to participate in the day-ahead market or in the intraday market, does not exclude a compensation for its loss or its foregone profit. So we agree that this producer should have access to the market, but we just conclude that based on a best forecast, this will not be the case in real time. He will be redispatched and he will receive a compensation. The only thing that we are asking is, okay, you will not be redispatched down because you will not be scheduled to run, because we already know that you cannot do that, but we keep the compensation. So you can still receive a compensation for your foregone profit, because transmission capacity was insufficient, even though you were in the same control area, and that would be a discrimination. So that's a first thing. And then on the role of forward markets.
But I think who decides that? Because you give a lot of power to the one who decides what is expected to happen and how to do the compensation. The devil will be in the details, and if it's the TSO, then yeah, you give them a lot of power to decide about market outcomes and so on. So I wonder if you're not concerned about that.
Yes, but you already do that. Now you are giving the TSO the power to just let everybody freely use its power units, even though, if this is the case, even though in your best forecast you know already that you will redispatch some units downwards. So this is already a lot of power for TSOs, which is a consequence of the inadequate bidding zones. But I think we can agree on that. So there is already a lot of power for TSOs, and we think that that indeed in this case you will just shift your redispatch from a few hours in advance or even closer, that you shift it to day ahead or intraday, and that you just will take the same decision, but just earlier you will just publish. From the moment you know that you will redispatch some units, the TSO needs to publish this, and then the generator itself has to decide that it cannot take part in the day ahead, for example. I know we think that the bigger your price zones or your bidding zones are, the bigger the role of the TSO. And that's why we are advocating already for several years that bidding zones should be made smaller. But this is not the way that the regulation has decided. The regulation has decided differently. And so this is the new framework for us. The legal framework is our Bible, so we follow that as close as possible. But within that framework, we think that you could decrease this price distortion by applying preventive redispatch. And you will pay, you still have to pay these units as you would do without this preventive redispatch. So we don't think that there is much difference to that. There is already an important role for TSOs in big control areas, unfortunately. Then if I can, is that okay, Tim, as an answer? Okay.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. Yeah.
And then a second about forward markets and the completeness of that. Also there, I think it is important. I think that something like option trading and power exchanges for options could become important. It's like an unregulated, decentralized capacity market that you can say, without a central body saying that it should be capacity. I think it will be helpful to come to lower the risk. But as I said in my presentation, I think it will be. I think forward markets for capital intensive assets with long lead times, I think for them it's more important, much more important that there are functioning forward markets, even if they don't look forward for the whole lifetime of the asset. I think it can take out a large part of risk, the so-called Class B variables. And then I think for this kind of these so-called super peak capacities like demand response and emergency generators, yes, options would be very welcome. But as we saw in Belgium, the lead times and the capex, it's much lower. And what we saw in Belgium was rather spectacular how market parties were reacting. We were pleasantly surprised by their speed and also the volume that was being developed on such a short notice. I think it will help, but I think it's maybe not necessary to have it. But it will be more efficient if you have them. So then we should certainly think about liquid option markets. And on the other hand, I think the reason that they are not there yet is because we haven't seen adequacy risks much in Europe. You could even say that there is even some overcapacity. So then we haven't seen much or a lot of or not frequent price spikes. And I think that can also be a reason why these option markets are not there yet, or if they are there, like in Germany, they are not very liquid. Okay.
Excellent. Andreas, I have a very interesting question from Francois Boisseleux from NG, which was aligned with the question that I had myself. So and this is maybe the last question that we can accommodate within time, but if you can stick around, there's a break between now and the next session. So if you can stick around, take a couple more questions. I plan to stick around, and whoever else wants from the attendance is welcome to. But let me just put this one into the regular time slot. So don't you see a contradiction between your statement, removal of price cap plus reliability standard equals adequacy solved, and the fact that in Europe and outside, the adequacy is an issue and people put in place CRMs? And then the question is, price cap and reliability standard play a little in an investment decision, don't they?
Yeah, Francois. I agree regarding the last statement. This is investors who will decide or not. That's a free decision. It's a liberalized generation market, so investors can do what they want. They can postpone investments, or they can decide to go through with it, and they have to rely that on all information that they deem relevant. But capacity mechanisms are something completely different. It is regulated, and it is heavily regulated. It is a central authority saying for the next 10 years what the adequacy situation will be and how much we need and who will pay for it. And you cannot, you need to pay for it. You don't have the choice. It will be through tariffs. So it's a completely different world than the free market of investment. And so also this kind of decisions with the new regulation has been regulated. There are new rules to come up with these heavily regulated market, which is, in my view, the biggest change of the power market since the liberalization took place 20 years ago. So because we are paying every single megawatt in the system a capacity fee. And so Europe came up with new rules. And in my view, these new rules, the extent or the importance of these new rules has not been fully understood by many, in my view. And I think it is, if your prices can go to the bidding limit, which is also, according to the regulation, something that you should do. You should remove price caps if you have any before, or you should consider to remove price caps and see if that would solve your adequacy concern. It's an obligation according to the regulation. I think the combination of this Article 10 and the definition of the low-rate target, the combination and the impact that it has on adequacy assessments, I think is not understood completely yet. Also, the fact that, as you know, Francois, in Belgium, we had some discussions about how the market revenues should be calculated in an adequacy assessment. So ILIA applied the median revenue of all the distribution of these possible outcomes in a probabilistic assessment. So it used the median revenues. The methodology that has now stated that it should be based on expected prices. So the role of forward markets is clearly acknowledged in the new methodology for assessing adequacy. And it's from the 2nd of October, so it's relatively new. And this expected, that you need expected prices, means that you will always have the effect of price caps, of prices going to the price cap of bidding limit. We will always see this effect in the expected prices because it's a probability weighted average. So if it's 10,000 euros with a probability of 1%, it's only 100. If it's 20,000 euros with a probability of 10%, is 200. So you will see that in the assessment. And this is also why we reacted on, for example, what ILIA is planning to do. ILIA is not planning to implement this new rule correctly. And if you would do that, if you would implement this rule of the increase of the bidding limit and Article 10 with the low-rate target definition, then I think you cannot conclude otherwise than that your adequacy assessment should come to the conclusion that you will meet your low-rate target. I think you can, and there are more than enough smart people, I think, in the audience to do this, to check these calculations and to check this statement. But I think it's not rocket science. I think it's relatively easy to do this check. And of course, I'm willing to accept any critique on this because I know it's a rather bold statement.
Andreas, thank you. We're now a bit over time. I guess maybe on my side, just one last really quick clarifying question, because it's just related to that last question. So I'm trying to understand what it means institutionally, the statement that the adequacy problem is solved. Does it mean that the Commission would treat CRM proposals by member states differently? Does it mean that ENSOI or TSOs of member states should do their calculations differently? On a practical level, could you comment on what that adequacy problem is solved statement actually means?
Yeah, for me, so everything depends on how DG Competition from the European Commission will treat these cases of notification of state aid, and that I do not know if they ignore this or not. That's something that I cannot predict. But in my view, if you follow the rules and if you follow what has been decided, then in well-functioning wholesale markets where prices can go to the price cap, then you should conclude that you should phase out your capacity mechanism, because there is also a rule in the regulation that when your adequacy assessment concludes 3 years in a row that there is no concern, no adequacy concern, then you should stop your capacity mechanism. So in my view, this is a clear conclusion that if DG competition will apply the rules as they are decided already, then they should come to this conclusion. I don't know if DG competition will do this, but that's something that we will see also for Belgium, for example, in a few months, I think.
Great. With that, Andreas, I want to thank you very much for this very interesting presentation and stimulating discussion. Also, thanks to the participants. This back and forth was actually something we were nervous about, and it went quite well. So we reconvene at in 1.5 hours at 2 p.m. with a session on machine and reinforcement learning problems in the electricity markets, moderated by Gilles Bertrand. See you in an hour and a half approximately. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.